So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the ABOO Book Club and our Meet the Author session with the wonderful NIKKI May, who is the author of WAHALA. NIKKI, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Just as a quick introduction, you were born in Bristol but brought up in Lagos. You've lived in London, and that's where most of your career has been, I think, but now you are in Dorset, and you started out at medical school and then you transitioned into advertising. So you've had a very interesting career, and now you are, I think, a full-time author, which is wonderful. So that's the sort of bones, that's what you put in the CV on your book jacket. Tell us about what the journey has been really like for you behind the scenes.
So we were talking about this earlier. I think it took me 50 plus years to actually get to the stage where I could write a book. So there's something to be said for aging. And Yes, I was born in Bristol. I don't remember it at all, but my dad speaks very fondly of it. He went to medical school there, and he was the first person in his family to go to university. I think he was probably the first person in his family to go on an aeroplane, but he loves Bristol and talks about it very fondly. And when he did used to visit, we had to all traipse around the Bristol bus tour and have all the sites pointed out to us and say, yes, wonderful all the time. He met my mother there. My mother's English. She was an art teacher. And then we went back to Nigeria, and I lived there from when I was 2 to when I was about 20. Very happy, normal life. Went to medical school. Dad's a doctor, and in Nigeria, education is hugely important. And I was going to be a doctor. I knew I was going to be a doctor before I knew how to walk. It was just what I was going to be. And right. I went along with it until I got to medical school and realized I absolutely hated it. And even worse, I knew I'd make the worst doctor possible. When you're chopping a cadaver up in one hand and eating a sandwich with the other, I think you realize that your levels of empathy are not what is required to be a doctor. So I dropped out, and my father was horrified. I mean, heartbroken, horrified, almost cut me off, sort of, you're on your own if you don't come back. So I ran away to London and joined the circus, except there wasn't a circus. So I joined an advertising agency. I was really lucky. I was temping and just happened to get a temping job in an ad agency and fell in love with it. I realized this is what I needed to be doing, not cutting up cadavers or killing people, because I don't think I'd have been the kind of doctor who cured them. So worked in advertising. It just was the right place, right time, which I think is quite an important thing. I do believe in serendipity, the right things happening at the right time. Loved it, loved advertising, set up my own agency about 8 years later with my husband. And we've worked together for forever, really. And that's how I got involved in copywriting. I've always liked writing. I wrote really crappy poetry as an angst-ridden teenager. I actually found my book of poems the other day, and it made me blush with how horrific they were. But in advertising, I wrote lots of copy for clients, whether it was technical stuff for British Telecom or books on mindfulness for Weight Watchers. And I loved writing. And the idea was write a book. And in fact, one of the reasons we moved to Dorset was so we could dial back and I would have time to write this major bestseller, which was going to be so easy, except it took 17 years for me to actually put pen to paper. There's something about writing to a client brief is actually much easier. It's a job, it's work, and the criticism is not personal. It's just, it's just work. You do it, it's a job, you just get on with it. But starting with a blank piece of paper without a brief is horribly hard. It's crippling. One of the main things you need to be a writer is huge amounts of self-doubt. It's an essential component of excellent writing, and I have it in buckets. So that was one advantage I had in this new chosen career. But eventually I went on this long lunch with friends in London at a Nigerian restaurant, as we often do. Every couple of months we'd meet in a Nigerian restaurant. My sister was there that day, and I actually felt myself code switch as I left. In the restaurant, we were talking loudly, gesticulating. We slipped into pidgin English. We talked about crazy things like generator parts for my dad's generator and what, it just the cornrows and power cuts. And then we'd segue into focaccia recipes and ski holidays. It was just that kind of banter that only people who have feet in both camps could understand. Left the restaurant, got on the very slow train at Waterloo to bring me back to Dorset, and felt almost a physical code switching out of Nigerian me into English me. Realised that tone down the voice, get your accent back, don't scream at the guard when you hand over your ticket. And I started sketching out the scene. And the first scene in WAHALA, which is in a restaurant that was very similar to the restaurant I just left, is remarkably almost identical to the first scene I sketched out on that train. And when you think in 60 edits, you think it's so amazing that that first scene is almost the same. And I think that's the other thing. Finally, it dawned on me what I wanted to write. And what I wanted to write about was people like me, people who have feet in both camps, people who are mixed race and middle class. There's a lot of Black books that to me feel very monolithic. They're about struggle, they're about pain, they're about trauma. And of course, that's totally valid, but it's not a universal experience. And I wanted to write about sassy women doing their thing, living their best lives. And obviously, being half Nigerian, I like a bit of drama in my drama. So had to throw in this crazy evil bitch, Isabel, to spice things up. And that was it. The story literally poured out of me in 6 months.
Wow.
A very shitty version of it at any rate.
So how long ago was that lunch?
So the lunch was in 2017 and I started writing in 2018, and in 6 months, so the middle of 2018, I had that first shitty draft. I printed it out, loads of paper, and I read it and realized it was horrific. It was just absolutely awful. I liked the people. Ronke, Simi and Boo were great and fully formed and I loved them, but they didn't do anything apart from go for lunch, talk about clothes and gossip. I'd made the cardinal mistake of falling so in love with my characters that I couldn't hurt them. So I put it in a drawer, shut the drawer and tried to forget I'd ever started. The problem was I told quite a few people that I was writing this book.
You made yourself accountable. And Michaela, Michaela says, does the restaurant owner know that the restaurant was part inspiration for the book? Did you go back there and...
Unfortunately, the restaurant we used to go to has closed.
Oh, no.
But there are lots of very similar Nigerian restaurants, and every time I go in I do say be careful because you'll be in the next book.
Well, that's great. That's really so you tell me about your writing process, because that's one of the things that a lot of people in this group are doing, are writing their book or have written their book. So did you plan first? It's very well plotted. It's a great story. It's got three couples really, plus a wild card, I suppose, would be the main plot. But they all, kind of their stories go in and out of each other's lives, and it's really, it's beautifully plotted. So did you do that planning exercise at the beginning?
Beginning, I had a rough idea. I knew that I wanted 3 characters. I think coming from an advertising background, you think about things in a more, I don't want to say commercial, because commercial is somehow a bad word. I don't think it is, but it apparently is. I wanted to write a book that people would read. It wasn't about doing this for me. I really wanted to write a book that other people would read, that people would want to read. So I did think about having characters that everybody, not just Black women, but any woman, any person really would identify with. So I knew I had to keep them quite separate. I knew I wanted it to be set in contemporary London because I'm really lazy and I need locations that I've actually been to. And I knew that Isabel was going to be trouble. And I also knew something terrible was going to happen at the end. So I had a really good idea of what would happen. And then I started writing and that all went out of the window. Nothing bad happened. and even Isabel wasn't that bad in the first draft. So when I put it away, and 6 months later read it again, and mainly because I realized these characters were good. I actually knew I had good characters, so it's about making the book work for them. Yeah. So that's when the unpicking happened. It was literally unpicking every single scene, coming up with a ridiculous spreadsheet about what had to happen when, and how each scene had to move you forward, back to basics kind of stuff, the stuff you learn, you get in any book of how to write a book. Making sure that there were cliff edges at the end of chapters, and also putting those threads in so that at the end, when there is the big reveal, it doesn't feel like you've conned your reader, that actually the threads were there from the beginning.
Yes.
I also went a lot of Agatha Christie. I'm a huge Christie fan. I think she's just a genius. And her cleverness is, the story is there, you can, it's there for you to unpick, but you don't actually, I've read probably all her books 3 or 4 times, but I can still forget who did it each time I read one of them. But the story's there for you. So she's not conning the reader, she's kind of bringing you along with them. So it was a very disciplined thing. I mean, my mum said, surely writers just write and that's it. It's like, no, they don't. They write and they rewrite and then they rewrite again. And then a lot of writing is in the rewriting.
Yeah.
I think it's somebody very clever who said the first time you write a book, the first draft is you telling yourself the story. And only when you know the story can you tell it properly. So the retelling is the rewriting and getting it to work.
That's a really good thing to say. I mean, Ernest Hemingway said all first drafts are shit, which I think is just, you know, that's
right
the
in my
line,
case.
Basically. And Debbie's just saying, I do love to plan on a spreadsheet. And actually, yeah, I mean, it really, you know, kind of warms my heart to hear you talk about that sort of planning and spreadsheet and the plots and the, because I think I do think that's a really necessary part of
I totally agree. The other spreadsheet I have, which my agent has actually put on the wall of their agency, was a character spreadsheet. So for Ronke, Simi and Boo, I had a spreadsheet that when I printed it out in 12 point was taller than me.
Oh, wow.
And I went through questions for each character. And it wasn't just things like, what do they look like? Where were they born? Where did they go to school? What did their parents do? But really things about how do they feel? What would they do if they saw someone kick a dog? How would they help an old lady cross the road? What is in their fridge? Did they keep their ketchup in the fridge or in a cupboard? Things that would never ever actually make it into the book, but meant just by answering those questions I knew them inside and out. And I think I had to do it because by having 3 points of view, it's really important that readers know which section they're in. And so they had to sound different, and to sound different, they had to actually be fully fledged.
Absolutely.
People.
And they're really fantastic characters. And I wondered if you had based them on any of those friends that you had lunch with, or anybody else you knew, or whether they just, you know, kind of grew out of your imagination completely.
It's really funny. My sister's listening on the Zoom, so she'll laugh when one of the first things she said when she read it is, "Which one is me? Am I Ronke?" And it's really funny. Everybody wants to be Ronke. Yeah. The truth is, there's bits of me in all of them. So Simi dropped out of medical school. I did that. Ronke's grandparents wanted nothing to do with her. Mine were like that. Boo has this sense of not belonging. She adapts to try and fit in. I've done that. People used to call me a chameleon because I would change depending on which environment I was in. And there are also bits of all my friends in there. They're bits of my sister, they're bits of friends. The scatter cushions I stole from one of my best friends, Maxine. You know, so there's, I think that's a wonderful thing about being a writer, as well as lots of self-doubt, be very nosy. I am such a nosy person. On the train, I'm eavesdropping on other people's conversations. I always want to know why people are doing things and what they're doing. You see someone with dimples and you suddenly think, oh God, that'd be brilliant in my character. So I think it's about picking bits, but nobody is one person. It's not autobiographical and it's totally fiction. And when people keep demanding which one is me, the easy way to shut them up is to say, you're Isabel. And suddenly they don't want to know.
Yeah, so Leslie's just put in the chat, I heard Douglas Stewart, author of Shuggie Bain, say he could have written 100 different mum characters in his book and they could all have been his mum. And that's a really nice point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
thanks
true.
for that,
And
Leslie.
he's a very interesting writer because people keep saying it's autobiographical and he insists it isn't. But you do draw on what you know. Of course you do.
Yeah.
So of course they're, you know, all my characters are mixed race because I am, and I wanted to see them on the page.
Yeah. So your main characters, Ronke, Simi, and Boo, are all lovable. I mean, they're flawed, but they're lovable. But so where did Isabel come from? And is she as much a character as they are, or is she partly plot device?
I think I have to be perfectly honest and say Isabel is a bit of a plot device. But the truth is, there are people, maybe not psychopathic, but there's a group, thankfully a very small group of Nigerians, and not just Nigerians, you find these people everywhere, who are ridiculously, obscenely wealthy, have a crazy sense of entitlement, think that everybody is a pawn to be used in their game through life. And certainly in Nigeria, this group of people they've never turned right in an aeroplane, that if they ever fly on chartered flights anyway. And in Nigeria, they can get away with anything. They do own the law. They literally are above it. And so to me, it wasn't sort of impossible for Isabel to do the things she did and to get away with the things she did. And I used to think I could tell which country I was in by the state of the government. And if the government's really corrupt, then I must be in Nigeria. That's changed now. I can no longer use that as my guys. I could be anywhere. I could be in any country and the government could be as corrupt. But I wanted to sort of, as I said, I like a bit of drama. I think it's a Nigerian thing. We like spicy drama. If you've ever watched a Nollywood movie, you'll know what I mean. And I also, one of my favorite books and film and TV series is Big Little Lies, where you get that momentum, and to be honest, my objective when I started writing was to write a brown Big Little Lies. So when anybody comps me with Leanne Moriarty, yes, I did it.
Yeah, well, yes, no, now you mention it, I hadn't made that connection, but yes, I mean, yeah, absolutely, two of my favorite authors. And yes, there is that really kind of involvement with the plot, where sometimes some of the plot's a bit outrageous if you kind of think about it intellectually, yes. But you're so sucked in by the characters and the plot that everything is completely believable. So yes, that's really interesting. You've definitely succeeded.
Thank you. I wanted to be entertaining. At the very beginning, I wrote, as I said, I'm used to working to a brief. And so with a blank page of paper, I just didn't know what to do. So I wrote myself a brief. And the brief was, write an entertaining book that has people like you in it. Write a brown Big Little Lies. Have a really crazy plot that people are going to say, no, make them gasp and make them laugh. And if you can do all of those things, you've done it.
Absolutely. Well, you have. And I mean, the proof of the pudding is the fact that it's now in pre-production as a BBC series that we'll be watching next year. So how did that happen? Actually, I mean, take us back to, how did the publishing happen? Did you write first and then find a publisher? Did you find an agent? What was the process for you?
So first shitty draft went in a drawer. 6 months later, dug it out, unpicked it, had a second draft, still shitty, but less shitty, did the same thing together. And then I felt pretty comfortable with it, but not comfortable enough to let anybody read it. It was just me and this book. So I entered a few amateur competitions. I entered the Bridport Novel Prize, the Yeovil Novel Prize, a few of those. And I got really lucky. I got longlisted for a couple. I got shortlisted for a couple. And then I won the Grindstone Literary Prize. These are just tiny prizes. They cost about £20 to enter. You send them 3 chapters and a synopsis. But the Grindstone that I won, the judge was an agent, and she said, please send me your manuscript when it's ready. So I tinkered with it one more time, went through it, and then I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. They say querying agents takes months and months and months, and you might have to query 100. Made another spreadsheet of agents, because I love my spreadsheets. So I had, I think, 60 agents on the list, and I sent it off to my first 8, including the judge from Grindstone. And I went off to walk my dog after I'd pressed send. And I came back a couple of hours later and there was a request for a fall. At this point, I'm literally screaming and running around the house saying, no, no. And then I sent off the fall, and within a week I had 6 offers of representation.
Wow.
This was, yeah, it was completely mad. This was just before lockdown. So I was really lucky I could go to London and actually sit there and talk to them. And I chose the Madeline Milburn Literary Agency because they were quite small, felt like a family. I met the whole team. They all seemed lovely, but it was an embarrassment of riches. I think I'd have been very happy anywhere. So I did not know how publishing works. I did not know about imprints. I honestly thought the agent would phone up a friendly publisher and say, here's my book, do you want it? But no, there was more editing. There was 6 months of more editing. My book was flabby in the middle, too fast at the end. I needed to put more of some people on the page. So more bloody editing. And then 6 months later, we went on submission, and it was a big submission in the UK. I think we went out to 30 editors in the UK and about 20 in the States. And it was mad. We went to auction in both markets. So the first week was an auction in the UK, then there was an auction in the States, and it was Zoom meetings all the time. It was just mad. I just honestly thought I was living in a parallel universe. I used up more lipstick than I've used in my whole life for the Zoom meetings. And then after that, you think it's all done. And then we started talking to book to film people. And I think we spoke to 20 people. One was a Hollywood Oscar nominated actress. I spoke to a director who's done one of the Harry Potters. We spoke to loads of people, but in the end I spoke to Liz Kilgarriff at Firebird Pictures, and within 5 minutes of that conversation I knew I really wanted her to adapt Wahala. She just really got it. She got the characters. She seemed to know more about Simi, Boo and Ronke than I did, and I know these women inside out. And she'd done Bodyguard, she'd done Luther, she'd done The Cry. She was like my dream person. And so I said to my agent, I really want her to do it. And she came out with a really good offer, and that was it. And I'd heard that things get optioned and then that's the end of them. They sit there for years and then the option runs out. But within 2 weeks of being optioned, the BBC greenlit it, which is just mad.
That's unheard of, yeah,
completely
incredible.
mental. And they got a screenwriter called Teresa Ikoko, who's BAFTA nominated for Rocks, on board, and we had a Zoom with her and she was really keen. So she's writing the script right now. I think it goes into pre-prod at the end of this year, and the plan, touch wood, is for it to be on air next summer. And the best thing about the TV is I don't have to do any editing. I don't have to do anything, just sit and look, hopefully sit and turn up at the set. There's a big party scene in the book and I'm determined to gate crash the party scene. But it's wonderful because it's just dream come true. I'm still pinching myself. I know writing a book is amazing and being published is amazing, but the TV is just like crazy, wonderful,
absolutely
amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. So a couple of questions here. Leslie asks, were you still doing your day job at this stage?
So I was still doing my day job when I wrote the first draft, but I'm ancient. So we were planning to close the agency because, to be honest, we'd got so old. All our clients were getting younger and younger. And you get to the stage in advertising where you've done it all before, so you're a bit jaded and not as enthusiastic. So it was very serendipitous because the plan was retire and then not retire, but close the agency and then think of what we're going to do next. And turns out what I'm going to do next is be a novelist.
Fantastic. Yes. So Michaela says, how did you put together that spreadsheet of agents? Did you use the Writers and Artists Yearbook, or how did you find them?
I used the Writers and Authors Agents yearbook, but I also used Jericho Writers, which I found really useful because they were more up to date. So they tell you who was accepting queries now and what sort of genres people were looking at. But then you go into each individual agent's website, and it is complicated. You'll have slightly different requirements, and you know full well that if all you have to do is spell their name wrong, and your letter's going to go straight in the bin. So it is much harder work work than you think just to send out 8 queries. Sending out 8 queries probably took me a week of rechecking and checking. Do they want the first 3 chapters or the first 5,000 words? And is it Madeline with an EI or Madeline with an I? It was sort of, and also one of the tips was flatter. So each letter to make it slightly personal, and to talk about 8 authors that they represent. And, everybody likes a bit of flattery. So basically blow some smoke up their asses and they're more likely to read your letter and read your book. I don't know if any of that worked, but it was certainly
something did as well.
I think also, I think the thing is to be really professional about it. And although it's nice to think of yourself as a creative artist, the truth is this is a business and people want people to act quite business-like. So that's how I approached it.
Absolutely. No, that's a really interesting point. Debbie says, are there any famous faces you would like to represent your characters on screen? I don't know if the casting's done, but is there anyone you'd really kind of love to be Simi or Ronke or Boo or Isabel?
Well, the casting is not done yet, and unfortunately I won't have anything to do with it. But if I could cast Kayode, I have to be honest and say I would cast Stormzy. To me, Stormzy is Kayode. Right. Now people keep saying, but he can't act. I'm like, who cares? He doesn't have to act. He just has to stalk around the screen looking good. But I won't have anything to do with it, so it doesn't matter. Funnily enough, when I was writing the book, I had 3 actresses' pictures in front of me for Ronke, Simi and Boo. So in my head, I know exactly what they look like. I know exactly who they are. They don't, my 3 chosen actresses wouldn't work because one of them's 50, but her picture on my screen, she was 30. And one of them's way too young, and I can't tell you who they are. But I do know what they look like in my head. So I'm going to be as shocked as everybody else when I watch it and find they don't look the way I think they look. But I think the great thing about the TV is if it's wonderful, I'm going to take all the credit and say, that's my book. And if it's absolute crap, I'm going to say, nothing to do with me, Gov. They messed it up.
I'm sure it won't be absolute crap. I'm sure not. Oh, can I ask you about the audio book? Because I listened to the audio version and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And so your audio narrator was Natalie Simpson.
Yes.
Did you choose her? How did that come up?
So how it works is they sent me, Ollie, who's the audio producer at Penguin Random House, sent me sort of reels of 6 different people who he thought, so he did a selection and said, these are the people I think would be great. And then you listen to them and then you go and find other audiobooks they've done, other things they've done. And I knew I wanted Natalie from the get-go. Firstly, she's Anglo-Nigerian. She lived in Nigeria. So when I talk about okra soup or ewedu, she's eaten it. She knows exactly what it's like. She's mixed race like me, and I knew I wanted her. And then it was a question of, will she be available? Will she be able to do it? Because they work in very tight slots. So it was dream come true. And then she said she wanted to talk to me first. And I thought, to me, it was like an interview. It's like, oh my God, if we don't get on, she's going to turn around. But I didn't have to worry. We sat on the phone talking about Nigeria, talking about food, talking about all the different things that although she's a lot younger than me, it was a very similar experience. And I think she's read it beautifully. I mean, I'm in love with her reading.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. It was, all the different voices. She did men and women without being sort of cartoonish about them. You knew exactly who was speaking every time as I thought it, I mean, I'm English. I don't have experience. I've never been to Nigeria, but I really felt that through her narration, as well as, of course, through your words, I really got more of a sense of Nigerian culture and the interplay between the 2 cultures. And I would love to introduce Uju Asika here. Uju, it's lovely that you're here. You were our first ABOO Book Club author, and I wondered if you wanted to say anything, ask anything, discuss anything with Nikki about that, because you have not the same, but maybe similar experiences.
Hi,
Oh my God.
Uju.
Hi, Nikki. Hi. Sorry, I'm sort of in the middle of feeding the
No, I'm
camels.
sorry,
Oh,
sorry, I didn't
And
mean
so I'm going between the
to you.
kitchen and the living room, but I was like, I must join in this conversation because Nikki knows I'm a massive fan of the book. And, I have to say, just as a Nigerian, I'm so proud of you. Like, I'm
oh,
just so delighted to have this kind of book on the market. And I have so many questions, so I don't want to take up the all of the space. But one of my things is just like as a Nigerian author, because I think Nigeria before we had such a sort of strong literary tradition,
yeah.
and a very quite sort of weighty, Chimamanda style books,
Yeah.
which I love. And I wonder how that affected you when you were writing your book. Like, did you feel at any point, this is going to be a little bit too frivolous, or did you just feel like I'm not going to think about any of the Nigerian literary heavyweights that could be looking over my shoulder? I'm just going to write.
I think that's such a good question, and I think you're right. I grew up on Chinua Achebe. And you're right. It's this Wole Soyinka. These are gods.
Yeah.
These are legends. I mean, Chimamanda is a queen. I literally bow down when I read her books, and I think that's why it took so long, because I was supposed to start this book 15 years before I started it, and in fact, even the characters were in my head 15 years before I started. But it just felt too light, too frothy, too frivolous, too commercial. And it took 15 years for me to think, actually, you have to write your book. You can't write somebody else's. You can't put yourself into somebody else's shoes, and you can't judge yourself by somebody. It took a long time to just say, look, write the book you want to write. And yes, if it's too commercial, what's wrong with that? So it does feel quite and I think that's the thing I said earlier about you sort of feel any book by a Black author has to have a message, has to have a meaning, but I'm not sure it does. It can just entertain. Not all of us are put in the world to educate. We might just want to write a book that's fun.
Well, I think when you get to that stage where a book by a Black author does not have to be meaningful and heavyweight, then that's sort of partly that's the job done almost. You are now mainstream instead of kind of a special case.
I totally agree,
wonderful.
Lucy. I think the other thing is
the television series will do that as well. It will mainstream people of of mixed heritage, living in London, middle class. I think that will be a really important thing for everybody to see. Is it going out on BBC One? Do you know where it's?
Hope so. They're talking BBC One Sunday night 9 o'clock, which is like the prime slot, but it will have a streamer attached, so hopefully it'll be shown everywhere. Yeah. But I think your point is totally right. I also think when we can get away from calling books Black books, that will be huge progress, because it's just a book. I honestly think that we have more in common than there's more that unites us than divides us. Women everywhere go through the same issues, with people deciding whether we should have kids or whether we shouldn't and what we should do. We're all the same. I mean, it might be more complicated if you refract it through a mixed race lens, but the issues are entirely the same. And to be honest, we're all just people trying to do our best, trying to live our best life. So progress will be not having Black books, because we don't have white books. I've never heard anyone being described as a white author. They're just authors. And I really would love the day when I'm not described as a Black author, but just Nikki who wrote a book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If anybody else has got a question for Nikki, please do just shout out. Or so Uju, you've just said ask your question. Uju, I don't want to read it out for you.
I'll ask it. Yeah, I was just wondering, did you already have the twist in mind when you started writing it, or was that something that kind of came to you? I mean, I know you said you wanted to do like a Big Little Lies thriller, but did you already know like this is going to be what happens? I don't know if everyone has read it, so I don't want to give any
I'll
spoilers.
try to answer without a spoiler. I did kind of know what the end was going to be, but there were lots of ways that could go. And when I read the draft back and realized nothing had happened, this is when the Wahala came in, and it was about, you've got to show these women Wahala, and you've actually got to have the right Wahala for each woman, for each girl. And it was, somebody said to me, do the worst thing you can do the worst thing for each of them, which is absolutely evil, but was such good fun to think, what's the worst thing I could do to Ronke? What's the worst thing I could do to Simi? What's the worst thing I could do to Boo? And then actually do it. So it was pretty nasty and pretty brutal, but quite fun, really.
It was, yes, absolutely. No, that's absolutely brilliant. you did do, yes. It was brutal. And did you? I mean, did you? Did you feel sort of pain on their behalves as you did these things?
Oh God, there are times I was writing and literally tears were streaming down my face, and my husband would walk in and say, "What's wrong?" So I can't believe what I've just done to Ronke, and literally sitting there crying. And I think when you're actually feeling, I'm currently writing my second book, and it takes a long time for you to get really into the characters and believe in them. But when you start dreaming about them, and when you actually start feeling the emotion as you write or as you edit, then you think, actually, this is possibly going to be something good because it's actually affecting me. I'm actually feeling their pain or feeling their happiness.
Yes, no, that's great. So Clem, do you want to ask your question? Because this is actually something that Victoria said before as well. So Clem, am I putting you on the spot, or would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Lucy. Sorry.
Hi, Clem.
Hi there.
Pleasure to meet you. So my question is going to be about your title, even though I have another question. I'm sorry I joined a little bit late, so I'm not sure if you've addressed that already. I understand that you live abroad, but one of the things I notice about people that author books and they are not really resident in the country where they write books or they are writing about, even though they are from that country, is the fact that sometimes people who live in those countries feel that they cannot express or understand the the atmosphere or the thoughts or the happenings from which they are writing from. So they feel that what you're writing is already being colored by living outside of that country. I don't know if I'm making sense up until this point, but so that will bring me to my question to say that, did you at any point feel that you were going to be judged about writing this book this way, or did you receive support of locals who have read the book? I've not read the book, so but I've seen the extract online, and I really like, number one, let me quickly highlight the things I like about the book. I like the fact that you kept the name indigenous, so I could already see myself in the book, like from the names of the character. So I really love that about the book, and I can also say it's relatable. Like, I just feel like, oh yeah, right here with us. But I understand that sometimes when you write like that, people just feel like, no, you're not in the system, so you don't understand what is going on. Did you feel, or did you experience any backlash? And if you did, how did you manage it? And I want to also say well done with the book, and how did you settle for your title of the book? Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Clem. Lots to unpack there and some really good thoughts. That yes. So firstly, did I feel it was appropriate for me to write about these characters when I don't currently live in Nigeria? Totally. And intentionally, my characters live in London, which is where I lived. When my characters lived in Nigeria, it was when I lived in Nigeria. So I could write, it is my truth. It might not be somebody else's, but it is a lived experience. It's fiction, it's not autobiographical. But the Nigeria I write about is the Nigeria I lived in. The London I write about is the London I lived in. But yes, I have had some backlash. You mustn't read your Goodread reviews, everybody says, but we do. So I have had some backlash, and my sister has had me on the phone in tears saying, you won't believe what they've said. I mean, you have to get over it. But I have been told this book couldn't have been written by somebody who's ever been to Nigeria. You think, well, actually, I grew up there. I lived there from when I was 2 to when I was 20. And Nigeria is a very big country, and we can all have different experiences. But yes, I definitely lived there. And yes, this is definitely a book that it's not appropriating anything. It is definitely what I experienced. Currently, I'm writing my second book, and and half of that is actually set in Nigeria. And again, I've set it in the Nigeria of when I lived there, because I couldn't write about Nigeria now, because although I go on holiday, I'm going in June, I don't know enough about the day-to-day. I would feel that I'm sort of making it up if I wrote about like living in Lagos today. In terms of the name, Wahala was the perfect name for the book, and it was the name I queried under. And I was actually surprised that it ended up being the title. I was told, my agent said they'll probably change the name, and I was resigned to the fact that it might happen, but it didn't come up once. The book is called Wahala in the UK, it's called Wahala in the States, it's called Wahala in Czech Republic, and the TV is going to be called Wahala. And I'm so glad, because Wahala is just a wonderful word. Even if you don't speak any pidgin, it kind of says what it does. And if it could become part of our lingua, I think that would just be amazing. Also, I think we're not lazy anymore. We all have Google, and if we want to know what something means, it's not that difficult to go and find out. And so really pleased that it's called Wahala, and that was what I wanted it to be called.
And how would you actually translate Wahala into English? Standard English.
Trouble would be the easiest, but the thing is, that's what's wonderful about pidgin. It's kind of really hard to directly transfer it, but trouble or chaos or catastrophe or hassle, it can mean different things depending on the context. But in Nigeria, you hear the word Wahala 10 times a day because there's lots of it. I mean, everything is Wahala.
Yeah. So Amanda said big trouble is her.
Yeah.
Thanks. Rachel, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes. I was going to comment on the title anyway, because that's Igbo, isn't it?
It's pidgin. It's actually pidgin. It came down.
Yeah.
It's actually originated in the Arab world. It came down through the slave trade.
Right. It's a perfect title for the actual book, by the sound of it.
Thank you.
I must go and get a copy of that. I'll leave it at that, because normally when I come to one of these meetings on here, I tend to take over a little bit, so you're doing a good job. Thank you.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
Well, Leslie, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it? Whatever you prefer.
Yes, I'll ask it. Hi there.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Leslie.
Yeah, I was interested in the cover, actually. I just bought your book in the lovely Topping and Company bookshop in Bath on Saturday, and I was drawn to the cover, and it's so great. And I wondered if your ad agency background had sort of played a part in that, or how much input you'd had into that.
None whatsoever. And the funniest thing is, one of my aunts said, "Is that me?" It's like, no, I wish. But no, you don't, as an author, you get very little say in your cover, but my publisher sent me 2 options and strongly pushed me towards this one. They made it quite clear they wanted me to say I love this one, and luckily I really do. I thought it was intriguing, iconic. I thought the hands over the face were interesting, so I love the cover, and I love that they use the line "see me, see trouble," which is another Nigerian phrase that you'll hear all the time in Nigeria. It's another way of saying Wahala. So I absolutely love the cover. My American cover is completely different. I'll just, excuse me 1 second. It really couldn't be more different. It's a picture, but I love this too. It's really grown on me. In America, they wanted to pitch it as a more literary, more worthy book, so they didn't want to go with a person on the cover. But I think I've been really lucky. I just love both my covers.
They're fantastic. Yes.
The colours pull them together. They've both got the same sort of colour scheme, haven't they?
Yes, the pink, hot pink.
Stands out on the shelf.
It does, and it never gets old walking into a bookshop and seeing your book, I tell you.
No, that's wonderful. So if anybody else has got any questions, please just shout out or put your hand up, or write in the put it in the chat, whatever you'd like to do. I was wondering, Nikki, if we could, I mean, you say that, you sort of, you've written a mainstream book, an entertaining book, but actually there's a lot of really important stuff in your book as well. There's sexism, there's racism, there's class,
Colorism,
there's
yeah.
you know, all that colorism. So tell us how you kind of got that in such a clever and subtle way, but you know, what did you want to get across in about all of those things, really?
What I didn't want was an issues-based book. I didn't want to bang people on the head and say, here's an issue, here's something you've got to learn from, I didn't want to preach. And I personally think one of the best ways to tackle issues is to make people aware of them. And if you make people aware of them in a way that's not preachy and not judgy, I think it's more helpful. I also wanted to get across that Black people can have isms too, you know, tribalism, colorism. We're not immune to those things. So, for example, Boo is prejudiced. There's no other way to describe her. She has prejudices that come up in the book. And I have had a bit of stick for that, because people tend to think that anything your characters do must be something you do yourself. But the truth is, I think a lot of prejudice, if you dial it back, there's a reason for it. So Boo's father abandoned her mother before she was born. She never met him, but he's informed all her opinions on Black men, on Nigeria, on Nigerian men, and not in a good way. And then she met Ronke's boyfriends, who have all been Nigerian and have all been slightly dodgy. One of them borrowed money, one of them cheated on her. So this has informed her opinions about Nigeria too. The other truth is that most of the stories we hear about Nigeria on the news are negative. It's about starvation or poverty or crime or people doing credit card fraud. You know, it's generally bad stuff. The only good thing might be there's a Nigerian footballer who scored a goal, and that's about as good as it gets. So people's opinion about Nigeria is often negative. And I wanted to counter that. I wanted to show that there are some wonderful things about Nigeria. I wanted to highlight our food, our laughter, the smiles, the happiness. So I just wanted to show a sort of real women that you can fall in love with or hate, but you can identify with, but have these that straddle these two countries and have very different opinions about them and different opinions about what's home and what's culture and I thought it was interesting to show that we are more alike than we're different. And I did at the time think there'll be a bit of stick for it, but I honestly, luckily I'm quite old, so I didn't really care.
So who has the stick come from?
There's been, and it's not a lot of it, but there's been a few things saying that there's been comments that why are all of them mixed race? Why isn't, you know, and you think, well, why aren't they? Well, you don't read a book with 3 white characters and say, why are they all white? You don't read Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie and say, why are they all Black? So, you know, what is wrong with 3 people that look like me in a book? But there has been some stick about it is inherently colorist for me to have 3 mixed race characters but I think the other thing is, and this comes from advertising, is if everybody agrees with you, it tends to be because you're doing something that's very bland. Yeah. So sometimes having a polarized opinion is actually good. It shows that you've written something worth talking about.
Yes, I think that's a very good point indeed. Leslie, do ask your question. It's a really good question too.
Just go off mute. Yes, why do you think it's been so successful, other than the fact, obviously, that's a really fab story, really fab book, but there's lots of fab stories and books that don't become successful. What do you put it down to?
I think I've been really lucky. I think I think luck has a lot to do with it. It just happened to be, I think my book is fun. I think it's interesting. I think the TV thing really helped. It gave more of a buzz, but I think it's slightly different to everything else that's out there at the minute. It's kind of, as I said, it's not worthy. It's just fun, but with characters that are interesting and dislikable and flawed. I love flawed characters in real life and in fiction. I think charmed lives are really boring and perfect people are really annoying. So I really like the idea that my characters are flawed, that you've got a mother who loves her daughter but still is often sick of motherhood. You've got Simi with her imposter syndrome who's lying to her husband, and you've got Ronke who seems perfect but is really looking for a husband who's father shaped and is destined to fail at this search. So I kind of like that story of three women going out living, and I think other people have identified with that. I think other people can see themselves in these women. And I think also lockdown, we've all been sort of stuck in our houses, unable to go out, unable to see our friends, unable to have these long lunches. And this is a way you can actually remember what it was like when we had to dress up in jumpsuits. I know we're getting back to normal now, but we still have that thing of, even getting dressed is a shock to me now. It's like, gosh, putting clothes on and lipstick and shoes. And I think it was quite nice to vicariously live an unlockdown life with my girls.
Michaela, would you like to ask your questions? I'd like to know that too.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Michaela.
Hi, everyone. I would like to know your next book. Are we going to see these characters again in your next book, or are both of the books standalone characters? And I also wanted to mention that I really want, I'm feeling a bit emotional.
Oh.
I want Ronke to find a happy ever after. I'm like, so yeah, will she find it? Will you revisit these characters in this next book or in other books?
Definitely not in the next book. The next book is a standalone book if I ever finish it. But just so you know, Ronke lives happily in my head. She is, don't worry about Ronke. She is happy. I talk to her every night. She is absolutely fine. Tonya is a really good guy. He's looking after her. She's got her ready-made family, and who knows, she may have some more. And never say never. But right now, I can't even think about them. I've got to think about book 2. But I don't know. I miss them too. I really do. I miss talking to these girls. I know them so well, and so I'll never say never.
Right. Okay. Thank you for answering.
That's great. I think that when the TV series has been on, that you will have to write a second series. You'll have to write another book for the next series.
Ooh.
So I don't think we've seen the last of those 3 at all. I think we're going to have to, maybe there'll be hundreds of them.
Ooh.
Loads of a whole long series as they get older.
Even more Wahala.
Even more Wahala. Yes, that would be. Yes, that would be absolutely brilliant. So just can I just ask you what about the 2 cultures, and you've got a bit of French culture in there as well, but what if you had to sort of pick the best and the worst bits of English and Nigerian, well, say British and Nigerian culture, out of the whole mix? Where would you say, what would you say were them? Or maybe perhaps the worst bits of both is more interesting than.
It's difficult because the best bits are often the worst bits at other times. So for example, one thing when I first came to England that I found really strange and really exasperating was how we don't really say what we mean. So that's lovely usually means no, that's bloody awful. And yes often means no, I really don't want to. And it took ages to understand that you can't just listen to the words. You've got to listen to the inflections and the head movements and understand what's behind the words. And in Nigeria, people say it as it is, and they say it quite loudly. And when I first got here, I really missed that. But now when I go back to Nigeria, I think, God, please don't say it so boldly. You have people saying, ha, Nikki, you've got fat. And you're like, that's so rude. For Christ's sake, don't you dare say that to me. Can't you just pretend that I look exactly the same as I did 20 years ago? So it's funny how the best bits of both are the worst of both, and how both bits can reside in you so happily. So now that I'm here and I'm hoping to go and see my dad in June, I'm dreaming of all the food I'm going to eat when I get home. I'm dreaming of which Mama Put restaurant I'm going to go to. I'm there for, I think, 6 nights, and there are about 12 restaurants I want to eat in. And I know that on day 6, I'm going to be sitting there thinking, God, I could murder fish and chips, or I could just do with a beans on toast right now. So it's almost the wonderful bits are also the worst bits, and whichever one you're in, you kind of miss. Funnily enough, I've lived here in this very house for the last 17 years, and yet I'm talking about going home in June. And of course, when I'm in Nigeria, home will be here. So it's a funny, difficult, but wonderful thing to be when you're mixed.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that what came across quite strongly was the older, particularly male Nigerian culture in quite a negative way.
Yeah.
Was that intentional? Is that something that you
I think it's intentional. I think it's, Nigeria is still a very patriarchal society, and sexism is alive and well and thriving. And, there's still a sense of expectation that women will do what they're told, and there's a very different view of what girl children should do and what boy children should do. And it probably is getting better. I don't know, because I don't live there on a day-to-day basis anymore. But I do think, and boy children are much more important than girl children. So, and it's wrong. Obviously, it's terribly wrong. And for my characters, and I think in some ways, writing a book is actually cheaper than therapy. So lots of things that I buried deep inside about the stigma I felt when I dropped out of medical school, and the shame, even though I went on to have a really successful career, I've always felt like a failure, like a dropout, like being inadequate because I don't. And almost writing the book allowed me to work these. I could feel lots of sympathy for Simi, and I felt like shaking and say, Simi, you're good enough. You really are good enough. And in some ways, I guess I was trying to say that to myself. So yes, I guess a bit of therapy going on there.
Yes, well, her dad does say that at the end, doesn't he?
Yes.
That, and that, yeah, no, now you say that, that's really nice. I hope that happened to you as well.
It did.
Oh.
And my dad did turn around and say, I'm really proud of you. And it was ridiculous because I was pretty much 40 at the time. But I still needed that. I still needed his blessing in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, if that's the sort of downside of Nigerian culture, you also have to look at the abusive boss as well, and on the British side, and that's a horrible thing that's still going on. So really, she gets the worst of all worlds in that.
Yeah. And there's some things on the other hand in Nigeria, there's a real sense of family and of looking after your family that I think sometimes we're losing over here. So there's pros and cons. There's
Absolutely.
Good. We're all just trying our best, I guess.
Yes, but and it's just as I say, I think it's just so lovely that you've normalized all of it, and it's sort of something that through a book that isn't kind of heavy-handed, as we've already said, we can just kind of learn to live through those characters, understand how it works, and the relationships that come out of the bigger culture, and it's fascinating. Well, Nikki, you've given us an hour of your time. It's 9 o'clock, and I know I need to let you go. Clem says to you that it will be an absolute pleasure to meet you in June in person. So that's going to be fantastic. Ariane says, fantastic session. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you so much for being here. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's been such a pleasure. And the book was a huge pleasure. I really did. I was stuck in your book for 4 days. I would not take my headphones off as I was listening to it.
Lucy, thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy to talk to you, and I shall be an ABOO book club member now, so you're not getting rid of me. I will be there.
Fantastic.
Can I just quickly say something before we leave?
Yeah,
so Lucy messaged me, so I support Lucy a little bit in her Facebook group, and she messaged me and she said, I've just finished WAHALA. It's absolutely brilliant. I would love to have Nikki May on the Meet the Author Book Club. So I said, well, why don't you just go ahead and ask her? So she did. And then 5 minutes later, she came back and said, she said yes. And it was just so exciting.
It's true.
So thank you so much. Yeah, we were so excited. It's been wonderful. Anyway, I'll let you have the last say, Lucy. I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you, Michaela, for telling me to go and tweet Nikki and see what happens. And Victoria says, I'm so proud of my sister. I would be if she was my sister too. That's brilliant. So Nikki, maybe when the TV series comes out, maybe we can have a chat about that as well, because that would be fascinating.
Definitely. We see if Stormzy's actually shows up.
Yes, that would be exciting. Well, thank you all very much for being here. It's been a really great evening. Lovely, fantastic questions from everybody. Oh, yes, Debbie says we could all be extras. Yes,
all
invite us to the party scene. That would be great.
I'll keep Lucy informed.
Absolutely. Lovely. Well, thank you so much. Nikki May, author of Wahala. Fantastic book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Night, night.
Night.